Thanks for joining us. Local officials and authorities from the FBI and ATF gave a briefing on a deadly church massacre that killed 26 people in Texas. Officials say they have the suspect's phone, but have not yet been able to recover any information from it. 2 days after the massacre, they are focusing on gathering evidence and trying to find out more about the gunman and his possible motive.
By definition, we have no reason to believe that this crime was politically motivated or based on religious beliefs. We have no reason to believe that. There's still a lot of interviews to be done. We have some indication on what the conflict was between the family, what the timing and stuff like that. Still a lot of work to be done. As I said, it's only 48 hours into this.
And Elaine Quijano is in Sutherland Springs, Texas, and joins us now. Elaine, what is the latest you can tell us about the investigation?
Well, Roxana, as you noted at the top there, the phone that the authorities were able to recover, they have not been able to actually get into that phone. Of course, that phone is going to be critical as part of their investigation to see what kind of communications the shooter was having ahead of the actual attack itself. Now, when investigators were asked about what kind of phone specifically was recovered, they did not want to say. They said that doing so would encourage other bad guys perhaps to use that same kind of phone. But what they've said is that that phone, along with other evidence, has been sent to Quijano and the FBI lab there as they try to extract whatever information they can, along with any other kind of digital evidence or evidence that they've been able to recover. But that phone right now, Roxana, appears to be a key part of where they're focusing their attention right now. We also heard authorities here talk about the fact that the weapon that was used, all indications are that it was a semi-automatic weapon. There had been some question about that, whether it was a fully automatic weapon, a semi-automatic weapon. They said all indications are that the Ruger AR-556 was, in fact, a semi-automatic weapon. Roxana?
Elaine, is there any indication that the suspect was working with anyone else or any further information on his motive?
Yeah, no indication of that. We heard in that soundbite just a short time ago that they do not believe that there was anyone else involved, that religion they think was not involved. What we heard, once again, was this notion of some kind of friction between the shooter and the mother-in-law, and that there was a domestic situation, although we have yet to hear additional details about that. We know there were some threatening messages that were sent by the shooter, according to authorities. So we await more details on what else might be uncovered as a result of their investigation on that point.
And Elaine, you've been there for a couple of days now speaking to people on the ground. What is being done to try and help the victims' families?
Well, as you can imagine, this is just an absolutely stunning event. It's a small town, as we've been talking about since day one. The fact that something like that could happen here is really unimaginable for the residents. And here at First Baptist Church, this was really seen as the anchor, according to some, of this community, Sutherland Springs, and even the area around Sutherland Springs, a place where on Sunday mornings, if something was happening, it was going to be happening here. This was the place where people gathered on Sundays. So what we've seen are vigils. We've seen a physical outpouring of flowers, people bringing balloons, writing notes, leaving teddy bears, all kind of showing that emotional support. In addition to that, people are also wanting to make donations to help financially support these victims' families, both for things like funeral expenses as well as hospital expenses incurred by the survivors. So there's been a number of financial avenues that people have been trying to kind of channel those efforts. And now there is a pastor, an associate pastor here at First Baptist Church. His name is Pastor Mark Collins. He's been tasked with vetting those financial donations to ensure that the money, in fact, goes to the victims and their families. Roxana?
And Elaine, you mentioned the pastor, Mark Collins, in such a small community of just around 600 people. How are people handling this tragedy?
Yeah, he is someone who arrived here shortly after the shooting because as associate pastor, he got the call, as you can imagine, very early. And when he arrived, he described this scene that was difficult to comprehend, where you had, in addition to all of the emergency vehicles, the heavy police presence, there were helicopters that were airlifting victims to various hospitals. And he right away went into what he called battle mode, where he immediately tried to assess what were the needs of those in the immediate vicinity who needed to be escorted or met at the hospital to provide assistance spiritually, emotionally, and in terms of logistics for those families who were grappling with such unfathomable loss. What is it that they needed in those immediate moments? Now that we're past that sort of crisis point, what the pastor has said is that it's a matter now of continuing to make themselves available to family members and victims, and the feeling overwhelmingly, even among people who survived the shooting, is one of concern for not just their fellow church members, but he said for even the shooter's family. He said some of those people who survived the shooting were asking, how are the family members of the shooter doing? So just an incredible amount of strength being displayed here, Roxana, and grace, and certainly faith. As the pastor said time and time again, faith is what is continuing to allow people to get through this. Roxana?
Yeah, a lot of faith and a lot of compassion. Elaine, Quijano, thank you.